traditional song for Shavuot. With a basket on our shoulders, our heads adorned, from the ends of the earth we came. We brought the first fruits. From Judea and Samaria, from the valley and the Galilee, they made way for us. First of all, with a space drum in the flute. Salenu atefenu rashenu aturim nikzot haaretz banu hebenu bikurim miYehuda u'mishomron min ha'emek ha'galil banu derech lanu bikurim niknanu batov ve'cha v'chalil batov halal ve'chalil salenu atefenu rashenu aturim nikzot haaretz banu hebenu bikurim miYehuda u'mishomron min ha'emek ha'galil banu derech lanu bikurim niknanu batov ve'cha v'chalil batov ve'cha v'chalil.
Chag Sameach, everyone,
Chag Sameach.
and welcome to Temple Bethel. It's great to gather here tonight as we receive Torah, receive the gift of Torah as we celebrate Shavuot in this traditional way that we've done with our two communities for as long as I've been here. And I think it, Kendra Davidson, how long does this going to Tikkun Leil Shavuot go? Was it in existence before your time too?
No.
Oh no, okay, no, it's not that old. It's not really from Sinai, but it feels that way. So yeah, but this is just a real blessing that we have. You know, it used to be that this was the only time that we got together just for this tikkun, and over the last few years, as we've strengthened our relationship and our collaboration, we have more opportunities to come together. But this one has really been firmly implanted here. So tonight, as is our custom, we have a little bit of singing. So thank you, Cantor Davidson. Special welcome to Rabbi Brian Schuldenfrei. Always great to welcome you here to Temple Bethel as we share the Bima together. Again, a special welcome to those of you from Congregation Ner Tamid who were with us tonight. As is our custom, Rabbi Schuldenfrei and I, we are each going to teach. We're not going to teach at the same time. You don't have to choose. You're going to hear from both of us. And when we were talking a couple months ago, we were thinking, what do we want to explore tonight? And as the 50th anniversary of the Six-Day War comes next week, according to the secular calendar, there's been a lot of press recently and a lot of thinking and a lot of soul searching of what this moment means in the lives of the Jewish people, both here in North America and in Israel, what it means for the world community as well. So although we are not really going to delve specifically into kind of, tachlis political issues related to the Six-Day War, we are certainly going to touch on some themes. Rabbi Schuldenfrei will talk a bit about the identity transformation since 1967. I'll be talking about the use of power and being powerful and powerless in this time, and we'll just have an opportunity to teach and share together. What we're going to do is Rabbi Schuldenfrei is going to teach. Cantor Davidson will have a little bit of musical interlude. I'll teach, and then depending on the time, we'll have some questions afterwards. But because we have a lot to get through, I'm not going to spend any more time talking here, and I'm going to turn the bima over to Rabbi Brian Schuldenfrei. Do you want them? I'll pass it. You talk.
Thank you, Rabbi Briskin. Wow. Okay.
Start teaching. Clock goes now.
lose my steam. I just had a Diet Coke on the way over, so I should be pretty good for the next 45 minutes. But if I lose my steam and you need me to use the microphone, I'm happy to do that as well. I just don't know how to work it. You know how to. David Davidson has like iPads and buttons. Okay, so what I want to talk about is something that Rabbi Brisket touched upon, was how 1967, and specifically the Six-Day War, perhaps we even want to broaden the lens and look at Israeli independence through the Six-Day War, served as a radical transformation of Jewish self-perception. That, in fact, we could make an argument, and the argument that I'm going to make before you this evening is that Jewish self-perception, and perhaps even Jewish reality, actual perception from the rest of the world, or the Jewish existential state, is radically altered with the introduction of Israel and then its crowning moment in the Six-Day War. And so what I want to do with you, in order to tease this out, is to touch upon two iconic photographs. Two iconic photographs that I think in some ways underscore the point that we're going to make this evening. And then what we're going to do is we're going to look at these photographs, then we're going to take a step back and make a journey of Jewish perception of existential perception, and then we'll see how the introduction to the State of Israel in 48, and then following that the Six-Day War in 1967, radically transforms what it is to be a Jew, because our grandparents, and even though we're of different generations, some of us here, our grandparents, my Zadie, if when he was a boy chick, if I asked him what it was to be a Jew, it would have been very different than the Jewish identity that I share with my children after whom he's named. And so we live on a scene of we're on a scene of a radical transformation of Jewish identity. And so perhaps we'll use this moment to take a pause and to sort of understand where we've been and where we are, which will also then, of course, beg the question of where we're going. And so what I'd like to do is to take a look at these two iconic photographs. Most of you are familiar with both of these photographs. We're not looking for the history behind them. What we're going to do is the emotion that they elicit. The top photograph taken in Warsaw during the Second War, right at the beginning of the final solution, at the liquidation of the Polish Jews. What do you see there? What emotion does this picture evoke? Fear. What else? Horror. What else? There's giving up. There's a resignation. And that's a good word that we want a resignation. We give up. Now, that's not to say, this is very important, especially when we're talking about the Holocaust. It's not that we give up because we're any less. It's just that, oh my gosh, we are, borrowing from Rabbi Brisket, we are powerless. Not because we're any less, but the conditions around us are so that we have been rendered powerless. And the utter fear of that little boy in the foreground, and you look at his face, and you could say that that picture alone marks the identification of Jewry, and then perhaps even the clarion call to bring about a transformation. Fear, hopelessness, resignation, hands up. That's the first picture. Disbelief, horror, pain, suffering. Let's look at the second picture. The second picture, of course, is that iconic photograph taken moments after the Israelis reclaimed where they said Har HaBayit actually, I saw it, says this is in terms of, for those of you who are, are into photograph, this is a terrible picture, he said. Because you got like pictures of people and little snippets of noses hanging out, and you're not supposed to, there's all sorts of superfluous things. A good picture, he said, is supposed to have the least complicated, it's supposed to focus on the subject. But he said that this picture tells a story. And that's why it became iconic. He said it was one of the worst pictures he ever took, but it actually was the most famous. What's the story that this last picture tells? What's the emotion that it evokes?
Awe.
Awe. Good. There's awe. For sure there's awe. There's a look to the future. And how, Margie, how are they looking to the future? Up. Good. Who said it? What did you say? Empowered. Look at these handsome young men. They're strong. They're wearing army gear. They're handsome. They've just conquered. And they're looking to the future with confidence and self-assuredness. And reaching out to each other. There's a good, there's nice camaraderie there. Good. So how do we get from this to this? From this picture, and if you think about that, they could not have imagined this. So how did this become this? So in order to understand that, we have to kind of take a step back. And the first thing that I want to do is to analyze this. This top picture, not as a photograph, but I want to look at its roots to understand where this philosophy of, the Jewish association with hopelessness or Oy Gevalt Judaism, where does it stem from? Where does it emanate from? The source that is upon us, woe is me, where does that come from? And in order to understand that, I want to turn to page 2. We have to go all the way back to the prophet Jeremiah. Now the prophet Jeremiah is a little guy who grows up in the town, in the portion of Eretz Israel that was a portion to Benjamin, which abutted with Judah. And what does Jeremiah prophesize that's going to come? What does Jeremiah say? This is going to happen. What does he tell the people? Doom, destruction, and gloom. What historical period are we? Does anyone remember? 6th century BCE. The 6th century BCE. So we're talking about a long time ago. We're talking 2,600 years ago. 2,600 years ago is when this begins. And so here's Jeremiah. Jeremiah is a prophetic, he's a student sort of in the same kind of light as Isaiah, although they never met. Isaiah is 100 years before him. Isaiah witnesses the fall of the northern kingdoms and the 10 lost tribes at the hands of the Assyrians. And then Jeremiah recognizes the ascent of the Babylonian Empire. And he looks to the north, and he recognizes once again the Assyrians and the Babylonians used to vie for power. If you think about it, ancient Israel was really always a power struggle, with Israel being in the middle between the north, and it depends on who it was of the day, the Assyrians and the Babylonians, and the south, the Egyptians. And there was only one way for the two of them to get to each other, and that was through Israel. So there's a tug of war. And what Jeremiah states, and this is shocking, Jeremiah revolutionizes Jewish prophecy. Because when you think about a prophet in the Jewish tradition, when you think about Moses, Moses would say, if you did something wrong, what do? Repent, you ask for forgiveness, you observe a good Yom Kippur, Ashanu, right? You we've got to change until Jeremiah. Until Jeremiah. Now look at the second source. So page 2. Would anyone like to read nice and loud for us? You can read from the English. Jeremiah chapter 25. Someone read nice and loud. Jeremiah chapter 25. Go ahead, Warren. Nice and loud.
But you would not listen to me, declares the Lord, but vexed me with what your hands made to your own hurt. Assuredly, thus said the Lord of hosts, because you would not listen to my words, I am going to send for all the peoples of the north, declares the Lord, and for my servant, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, and bring them against this land and its inhabitants, and against all those nations round about. I will exterminate them, and make them a desolation, an object of hissing, ruins for all time.
Okay. What do you notice about that prophecy? It's very grim. It's very dark. By the way, Jeremiah is the prophet we know the most about. And you know what Jeremiah needed most? Jeremiah needed a hug. Because Jeremiah was like, I got the worst job in the world. And he lamented. He really meant it. He had he probably needed also a good psychologist. Because, first of all, it's a terrible job being a prophet. Because a prophet tells people things they don't want to hear. Jeremiah had a doubly tough job. Because Jeremiah is not only telling people things that they don't want to hear, but what's missing from this than what I said about the Yom Kippur paradigm? There's no upswing. You know what? Josie comes, and she's like, oh my gosh, we've done bad. What should we do? You know what Jeremiah would say? Nothing. You're done. But we've done tshuva. We're repenting. Doesn't matter. Just talk to God. No, still bad. You know, but that's not supposed to be very Jewish. And Jeremiah goes, I know, I'm just the prophet. I'm just repeating the words. So in Jeremiah, there seems to be, which is a really very, very interesting, there's traces of it at times earlier in Jeremiah where Jeremiah is almost like, okay, you could do this, but the overarching image of Jeremiah is, you are doomed. You're a nice guy, but, you're all doomed. We're all doomed, and there ain't nothing we can do about it. Boy, that's a terrible job. Not a good job for a nice Jewish boy from Benjamin. And not only that, Nebuchadnezzar, who is the Babylonian king, the guy who's going to come in and destroy Solomon's first temple, what is Nebuchadnezzar? According to this text. God sent him. He's a servant of God. He's not a bad guy. In the cowboy western movies, he's not wearing a black hat. He's doing his job. God sent him. He is just an agent of God's will. So this is 6th century BCE. Jeremiah prophesies through the destruction. This political philosophy still, although earlier, permeates throughout Jewish identity. Actually, there's a second part to it. Someone look at page 3, Jeremiah 27. There's an added dimension that's even more depressing. So the first dimension in Jeremiah 25 is, you stink, you've sinned, you're going to get it. The bad guys are working for me, so maybe they're not really bad. And you got to follow them. That's Jeremiah 25. Jeremiah 27 really piles it on. All right, who's going to read Jeremiah 27, page 3? Go ahead, Peter. Nice and loud.
Thus said the Lord to me, make for yourself thongs and bars of a yoke, and put them on your neck. And send them to the king of Edom, the king of Moab, the king of the Ammonites, the king of Tyre, and the king of Sidon, by envoys who have come to King Zedekiah of Judah and Jerusalem. And give them this charge to their masters. Thus said the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, say this to your masters. It is I who
outstretched arm, and I give it to whomever I deem proper.
Or I take it away.
Right. So it's no longer that we're living by the code of Deuteronomy, which states, you do nice things, good things happen. You listen to God, it rains. There's no secret sauce in Deuteronomy. Everyone understands the rules of the game. Jeremiah comes along and he says, by the way, you did really bad things, so you're going to get sacked. And there's nothing you can do about it. You can fast on Yom Kippur from today till tomorrow. It doesn't matter. You can sing a shamu, listen to Rabbi Briskin's good sermons, but nothing is going to happen. Nothing's going to change it. You're going into exile by my servant, the bad guy, Nebuchadnezzar. And by the way, for the future, I just want you to know, I decide who gets what and when, and that's beyond you. So good luck. So in other words, wait a second, I thought that if I played my cards the right way, it would all, I understood how to get reward. So maybe I messed up this time, but maybe in the future it'll be okay. Says Jeremiah 27. No. When you mess up, it doesn't, or you do well rather, it doesn't necessarily matter. Because God just gives and takes as God wants, because God is God. Oi. Jeremiah is a double oi. And in some ways, even though Jeremiah is 6th century BCE, this political philosophy, or this theological philosophy, permeates the Jewish soul for generations, for millennia to come. So Jeremiah comes, Nebuchadnezzar, I'm going to do a quick Jewish history here. Nebuchadnezzar knocks down the temple, the people go into exile. Then the Persians knock off the Babylonians. Cyrus the Great says, guess what, guys? Go home. P.S.
Lamentations comes next.
Right, well, we're not going there today, but yes. So then, go home. Go home to your promised land. P.S. Don't forget to send the taxes. And so they go to send them home. The Jews don't really want to go home. Ezra and Nehemiah got to kick them along home. And so they finally go home. Then they build the second temple. They build the second temple. They keep building it. They keep building it. They keep building it. Then the Greeks come along. Wait a second, you say, but I know a story about the Greeks. These young guys, the Maccabees, they rise up in the feast of Antiochus Epiphanes IV, and they get rid of that bad guy. It's the story of Hanukkah. Isn't that great? Doesn't that fly in the face of Jeremiah? And yes, you would say. In fact, let's look at the Maccabee source.
There is a caveat though with Jeremiah. He does buy some land.
Right.
Saying in a sense saying that eventually they will come back.
So he knew they were going to return, but he changed the whole rules of the game. So he knew they were going, and he does that when they're at their worst hour. So actually, this is the slight bit of redemption in Jeremiah, is that he, when it's really coming apart, he holds the people's hands. He buys the land as a statement to them, hang on while you're in exile, because I'm buying land here. I'm expecting to come back. But nevertheless, he changes all the rules. He didn't say to them, before he bought the land, he could have said, hey, just do tshuva. And actually, one of the things that Jeremiah complains about is there are lots of prophets running around the same time as Jeremiah who are saying, hey, do tshuva, it's going to be okay. And Jeremiah is like, no. I'm a Yachid. I'm the only guy on the block who's telling you the way it is. And it's not what you want to hear, but it's the truth. And he changes the rules of the game. And then, so then you say, but wait a second, Rabbi. By the 2nd century BCE, it all straightens up because we have the Maccabees. And I give my grandchildren, we celebrate Hanukkah and I give them guilt, and we talk about the Maccabees. Well, let me show you what our ancestors did to the story of the Maccabees. First, let's take a look at 1st Maccabees, and for the sake of time, I'm not going to read it. 1st Maccabees. smacks him down and says, get out of here. And then he goes and cleans up the temple. And that's the story of Hanukkah according to 1st Maccabees. The Greeks come in, Judah Maccabee stands up, he smacks them down, he says, get out. Then he cleans up the temple. And you know what our ancestors did to this story? They put it on the editing room floor. They cut it out. You don't find 1st Maccabees in our Bible. It's not part of the Tanakh. 1st Maccabees is preserved in the Apocrypha, which is part of the Catholic Bible, but it's not in the Jewish Bible. Now we don't know much, and there's a lot of academic speculation as to the canonization of the Hebrew Bible and the processes that were undertaken towards that canonization. But one thing that was pretty clear is the rabbis who were the descendants of the Jewish people looked at the story of the Maccabees and they didn't like it that much. They didn't like Judah Maccabee standing up and smacking people around because they're going to get killed if they do that. And in fact, the rabbis knew that from first-hand experience because the greatest rabbi of all time, Rabbi Akiva, he got caught up in all this and how did it end for him? Later on with the Romans. Not well. Rabbi Akiva comes across a guy named Bar Kokhba. And Bar Kokhba says, I'm strong, I'm tough. I'm going to get rid of these Romans. Rabbi, I'm the Mashiach, which means the anointed king. It doesn't mean like our Christian friends. And so he says, okay, I'm going to support you. And you know what the Talmud says about Bar Kokhba, how they knew he wasn't the Mashiach, why he wasn't the Messiah? Because he got killed. And then what happened to Rabbi Akiva? He got killed. So when they look at it, they're like, wait a second, if you act like that, joining rebellions, smacking people around, acting like the Maccabees, you're going to get killed. And so our tradition sort of silences this. The rabbinic tradition carefully omits signs of militarism. And in fact, that sweet story of Hanukkah, where we find a little bit of oil and then it lasts 8 days, that's a story to get you off of the Maccabees. The Talmud doesn't want you paying attention to the Maccabees because if your son grows up to be a Maccabee, he's going to get himself killed. And so instead, we got a great miracle. And then everyone's like, miracles. We like miracles. And then you look about, oil, a little less than a lot. And that's a message that we can get behind. That will get you killed. And so the Talmud, in the briefest of ways, goes over the Maccabees. And in 1st Maccabees, which is a more historical account, there's no oil. There's a military victory, a reclamation of the land that is ours. That's 1st Maccabees, and we cut it out of the Bible. Because there was an understanding already that seemed to have permeated Jewish thought going back now to Isaiah, 500 years earlier, Jeremiah, 500 years earlier, that as Jews, you were going to get punished. When the punishment came, like Nebuchadnezzar, it's punishment that you deserve. You got to take it. You may have even been good, but God gets to decide your fate. And there's not a whole lot you can do about it. And so, there are basically 3 or 4 exceptions to that throughout Jewish history up until modernity. So we have, again, we talked about the Maccabees, we talked about the Bar Kokhba revolts, and the great revolts 50 years before that against the Romans. like the worst pogrom that the Jews experienced in, in Russia, and now we don't think about it as much because of what we know that comes 40 years after it. But at the time, the Kishinev pogrom shook the Jewish world to its foundation. And so much so that it kind of even inspired an aliyah, the second aliyah to Palestine. And so look what Theodor Herzl says. The Zionist movement is I don't want to say peripheral, but as based on history. But what happens then now in contemporary times, the Jewish power in some ways grows in one geographically very specific area, while in another place it shows what happens when Jewish powerlessness is exploited to its awful end, and that of course is the Shoah. And so then you look, and we're going to wrap things up. Look at Amos Oz. Amos Oz's father, he's recalling this in the Tale of Love and Darkness, the last page, page 6. Bullies may well bother you at school or in the street someday, but from now on, from the moment we have our own state, you will never be bullied just because you are a Jew. In other words, Amos Oz's father tells him, we're not doing Jeremiah anymore. We saw this, and now let's move to this. Not that, never again. For tonight, that's finished, here, forever. I reached out sleepily. Now, that was his father. Now Amos Oz replies, I reached out sleepily to touch his face, and instead of his glasses, my fingers met tears. Never in my life, before or after that night, even when my mother died, did I see my father cry. The Jew had changed. This had finally changed the Jew. And now we move towards this. So then the question, and I'll leave this, maybe Rabbi Briston will touch upon it, is when you have no longer this, but you've moved to this, what do you do with that power, that empowerment, that look to the future? When you claim control of your own future, when no longer do you say to when you no longer accept Jeremiah as that someone else authors your own fate, but rather when you decide that you are in control of your own destiny, comes great responsibility. And so that's still a question that's being asked in Israel today. What I want to point to is actually a response that Ben-Gurion wrote to Natan Alterman. Natan Alterman was the Zionist poet of the early state and pre-state Israel. The Silver Platter is his most famous poem that many of you are familiar with, when he talks about the cost of building a state. He wrote another piece after, right towards the end of the War of Independence, when they were coming under question, the Israel Defense Forces, the newly formed Israel Defense Forces, on what occurred with certain Arab villages, right, like Deir Yassin and other Arab villages like Lida right by the airport, and what occurred there. And Alterman wrote a piece that was scathingly critical of a Jewish soldier who would act out in a horrific manner in the midst of war. And this is what David Ben-Gurion, who's the prime minister now of the nascent state of Israel, so it's the time to do. So this article comes out of the paper. Everyone thinks David Ben-Gurion is going to go crazy. And this is what he writes. The last source on page 6, and with this I'll close. My dear Alterman, congratulations on the moral force and the expressive power of your most recent column in Devar. That was the newspaper. You've become the voice, a pure and loyal voice for the human conscience. If that conscience is not active and does not beat in our hearts and during these days, we will not be worthy of the achievements we have had thus far. I am requesting your permission for the Ministry of Defense to reprint the column. No armed column in our army, even with all its weaponry, has your poem's power. In 100,000 copies, and to distribute it to every soldier in Israel. With appreciation and with thanks, David Ben-Gurion. So David Ben-Gurion understood that when you were to radically change from this to this, the real test of the new Jew is not how to respond to this, but how to live with this. And that's a question that we're still asking today. Thank you so much.
So, in 1967, a lot changed in Israel, and part of what changed was some of the beautiful music that came out of the celebration, the anxiety, and all. And I wanted to share with you two songs today, one of which you're all very familiar with, which I'll share second, but perhaps you're not familiar of its history, so I'll share that before I do. But the first song is one of my all-time favorites, and it's a song also by Naomi Shemer, and she wrote this in 1967, and it says, "Tomorrow, perhaps we will set sail from the shores of Eilat to the Ivory Coast, and on the old destroyers," where'd it go? There we go. "And on the old destroyers, oranges will be loaded." All this is not a yearning and not a dream. It is true as the light of noon. All this will come tomorrow, if not today. And if not tomorrow, then the day after. And we're still waiting for the day after. But we know that someday, if we hold on to this, it will come. מחר אולי נפליג בספינות מחוף אילת עד חושן ההר, ועל המחשבות הישנות יטעינו תפוחי זהב. כל זה אינו משל ולא חלום, זה נכון כאור בצהריים. כל זה יבוא מחר אם לא היום, ואם לא אחר אז מחרתיים. מחר אולי נפליג בספינות מחוף אילת עד חושן ההר, ועל המחשבות הישנות יטעינו תפוחי זהב. כל זה אינו משל ולא חלום, זה נכון כאור בצהריים. כל זה יבוא מחר אם לא היום, ואם לא אחר, ואם עוד לא מחר, ואם עוד לא מחר, אז מחרתיים, מחרתיים. And of course, the one that we're most familiar with, Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. But what most people don't know is that Yerushalayim Shel Zahav was written before the Six-Day War. It was written actually several months before the Six-Day War in preparation for Eurovision, in preparation for the great international song festival. And when the war happened, which was just before Eurovision, a final verse was written. And that's truly what happened in 1967, was the final verse which says, "We have returned to the cisterns, to the market and to the marketplace. A ram's horn calls out on the Temple Mount in the old city. And in the caves in the mountain, thousands of suns shine. We will once again descend to the Dead Sea by way of Jericho." And this one verse is truly all that happened to this song after the Six-Day War. The rest of the song was written before. אווירה לי, אווירים צלול חיים, וריח אורנים, נישא ברוח ארבעים עם כל פעמונים, ובתרדמת אילן ואבן, שבויה בחלומה, העיר אשר בדד יושבת, ובליבה חומה, ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. חזרנו אל בורות המים, לשוק ולכיכר, שופר קורא בהר הבית בעיר העתיקה. ובמרות אשר בסלע אלפי שמשות זורחות, נשוב נרד אל ים המלח בדרך יריחו. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. חג שמח.
Thank you, Cantor Davidson, and to have you sit for all this time without standing up. There's no, we're not davening. There's no standing and sitting. Why don't everyone just, while I get some stuff together, why don't you just stand up for a second, kind of stretch a little bit, reach out to your neighbor, wish them Chag Sameach. Thank you. Get that energy for that second wind that we'll need. While we're doing this, can you back up for me, please? Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Can I actually help pass these? Can you back up? Thank you. Thank you. All righty. Does everybody have the next source sheet? Can power be a force for good? Thank you. Everyone has that. Good. So why don't we take our seats? Because the only thing that's separating you from cheesecake is this shiur, this lesson. So you tell me. There you go. Yeah. I don't know if it's New York cheesecake. It's at least, Palos Verdes cheesecake, which I'm sure is quite as good. So you're allowed to, it's okay to yawn. It's, it's okay. Oh, sure. Okay. So as Rabbi Schuldenfrei was wrapping up his lesson, I realized that I had to actually flip to my conclusion before my introduction. because, using these pictures, again, we knew well what it was like to lack power, and now we know what it's like to have power. That's what I'm going to talk about tonight through these sources. Today, when we encounter radical evil, there's no choice but to use power, especially against those who want to kill us or our children. We didn't have power. We couldn't defend ourselves here. Now we can. But we also oftentimes embrace power differently. We're still getting used to it as a Jewish people, especially as Israelis, because for so long we were powerless and saw its consequences. I think that oftentimes there is this desire, or not this desire, there's this sort of kind of default of a position of powerlessness of the underdog, of having to overcome these obstacles in front of us. I think that we still have a difficult relationship with power. But as Rabbi Daniel Hartman, who is the president of the Shalom Hartman Institute from which this talk has been inspired, he reminds us that there is no great nobility in Auschwitz. There's no great nobility in Auschwitz, which is why we need this, which is why we need the Six-Day War, which is why we need these strong paratroopers who are liberating Jerusalem. I was talking to Jessica. Jessica's question was, what happened to this boy? Yeah.
So what happened to the boy, the short of it is that they're not sure. There have been 4 claims of people who think that they could be that boy.
Huh.
But no one, so one of the most credible was an Israeli physician, a survivor and an Israeli physician. But looking at the picture, their mind was on other things.
Right.
He thought that perhaps he was that boy. But with all of the claims, there seems to be there's some issues with the timeline. So there are about four people who think that they could be that boy, or perhaps that boy was one of the million who died.
So,
Do we know who took that picture?
Yeah, it was actually for a German report. It was issued to the Nazis as an update of what was going on in Warsaw.
So we go from this to this, but one of the things that I commented to Jessica is that it's not such a stretch to think that he or someone a little younger than him could have grown up to be one of these soldiers. And that's what certainly happened for those children who escaped the horrors of the Shoah and the powerlessness there and became a people who were empowered and having to deal with the situation of what it means to be powerful. Jews are powerful. We're a powerful force in this country. We're a powerful force in Israel. We are admired and respected by others. In fact, a Pew survey from 2017 showed that Jews are viewed the most warmly, it was an interesting word, warmly, viewed the most warmly by the American public. 63% of Americans view Jews warmly. 62% view Catholics warmly, and 61% view evangelicals warmly. We treated the most warmly in the United States. So that should all make us feel good. Give ourselves a big hug, right? Everyone loves us. At least two-thirds of the nation love us. But the Jewish response to that would be, okay, well, what about the other third who hate us, right? That's sort of how our psyche sometimes work. But even so, we Jews often see ourselves as having less power than we actually have. Or being, even in some instances, we feel that we are powerless. Sometimes we see ourselves as vulnerable. And we see ourselves just on the precipice of becoming powerless because of some catastrophe that could overtake us. And we know this and we feel this way because we've seen this throughout our history. Now, how do we see ourselves? Do we recognize our power? On a spectrum, do we view ourselves as incredibly powerful or incredibly powerless? Or do we have this cautious medium spot for it? And how does our own self-perception mesh with the way that others see us? What would others say about Jews? That indeed we are powerful, but we can either take this as a point of pride or a point of concern. Because we don't want to be too visible with our power, right? But consider this. We have tremendous clout and Washington, D.C. Not only the large number of Jewish elected representatives and those who serve in cabinet positions who have, over the decades, whether we have a Democratic president or Republican president, Jews who have served on high levels. Three Supreme Court justices who are Jewish currently, just on the Supreme Court. We have clout in D.C. among those who are elected, those who are appointed. Dozens of Jewish advocacy groups jockey for position around a number of issues, but first and foremost is the strong continued bipartisan support for the state of Israel. The strongest and largest Israel advocacy group remains AIPAC, as we know. However, smaller and other nimble groups are gaining modest strength, whether around Israel or other policy issues as well. Some try to denude this point. We're not as powerful as you imagine. But again, some of us want to see it as a badge of pride because we've made it in America. After 120 years, 140 years, we've made it in America. Israel, in 69 years, has become the most powerful nation in the region. It has the 11th strongest military in the world, which is very impressive for a country of its modest size and modest population. Jews hold positions of power, hold positions of leadership in every sector: politics, business, higher education, entertainment, the judiciary, medicine, to name a few. No industry is closed to Jews. And in many cases, our voice is loud and strong. But despite all this, our perception, our self-perception, is that we have less power or less influence. We might like to downplay it because we believe that our enemies, real or imagined, will use this against us. Now, we all remember just a few months ago that terrifying wave of threats against Jewish community centers throughout the nation, including at least one, if not two, threats to the JCC here in Long Beach. And we were horrified by the vandalism at cemeteries in St. Louis, Philadelphia, Rochester, New York. Those episodes frightened us, made us feel very vulnerable. And yet, how painful was it to discover that most, not all, but most, or many, of the JCC threats came from an Israeli teenager who was making these threats from a sophisticated setup in his home in suburban Tel Aviv. Perhaps this episode gave ammunition to white supremacists who say, see, the Jews are making this up. They did this to themselves. We're still on edge with this. So yes, we have power. And yes, we generally use our power as a force for good. However, there are challenges to being powerful. So what I'm going to take you through tonight with these sources were inspired by a lecture and a discussion from the Shalom Hartman Institute. And many of the texts that are here have come from Hartman as well, as the conversation explores the complexity and tension of both power and powerlessness. So first, we need to understand power. When a people gain sovereignty, they gain power. For 2,000 years, really after the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, finally after the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 of the Common Era, as Rabbi Schuldenfrei mentioned, we have had no sovereignty and very little real power. We may have an influence in society, because Jews were always, in many places, had an influential role through medieval times, even into more modern times, but we didn't have any true power. We could not defend ourselves. Remember, it didn't take very long to go from the golden age of Spain, when Jews were generally protected, could generally live well, albeit as second-class citizens, under Muslim rule. It didn't take very long to go from that period to the period of Christian rule within a century or two after the golden age of Spain and after the Christian power took hold, that we led to the Inquisition. It didn't take very long to go from a place of least comfort to complete powerlessness. We certainly know those who were, and those family members or people that we know who lived well in Germany for many decades, even a century or more, who for a time before and after World War I had actually flourished and thrived, and very quickly, with the rise of Hitler, lost all of their power, or whatever. They didn't have any real power then, but they just lost any sense of, they were rendered completely powerless and susceptible to whatever Hitler wanted to do and the Nazis wanted to do. It wasn't until the establishment of Israel in 1948 that Jews gained sovereignty, and with that, Jews gained power. Now there was a place where every Jew on earth could be protected by other Jews in their Jewish nation state. It's what Amos Oz's father was saying, is that, Amos, you may be bullied for other reasons. You may be bullied because you're too literate or because you're too smart or you're too nebbishy, but you're not going to be bullied because you're a Jew. Not here, no more. And that happened on the 30th of November, after the United Nations ratified that Palestine would become Israel, would become the Jewish state. So with this, we need to understand that sovereignty is a right and a responsibility. It's also a challenge. What happens when we misuse power? And these are some questions that we need to think about and consider as we go through our time tonight. How do we, American Jews, talk about power? What does Jewish power mean to you? How does a Jewish nation think about and exercise its power? And how does Israel today remain both moral and powerful? All right, now we study. Okay. Genesis chapter 9, verses 5 through 6. This is the part of the Noahide laws. This is what happens right after the flood. It didn't take very long for God to create the world and then God to destroy the world by flood and for things to start new again. Who would like, in their very loud outside voice, like to read Genesis chapter 9, verses 5 through 6? Someone just start reading. Nobody? Thanks, Cantor Richards.
But for your own lifeblood, I will require a reckoning. I will require it of every beast of man too. Will I require a reckoning for human life, of every man for that of his fellow man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For in his image did God make man.
Noahide laws, 7 laws that establish a moral structure for all of humankind. Not the 613 mitzvot that were just incumbent upon Jews, but 7 laws incumbent upon all of humankind. Among them, do not murder, do not kill. Okay? That's what we get there. We see that there is inherent value in life. Life has inherent value, and life takes priority, and there has to be a boundary to the use of power. We move to one of the most famous verses in all of Torah, kind of this piece in the holiness code of the book of Leviticus from Parshat Kedoshim, Leviticus chapter 19, verses 17 and 18. Who's going to read now? Debbie, thank you.
You shall not hate your kinsfolk in your heart. Reprove your kinsman, but incur no guilt because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. Love your fellow as yourself. I am the Lord.
V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, ani Adonai. But here we take a look. We know that, and we often look at this as the way that we're supposed to take care of our neighbor, but it begins with the love of self. Love your neighbor as yourself. The love of self precedes the love of others. Judaism commands us to take care of ourselves first. And we see how this plays out in the next text from the Talmud, the tractate called Bava Metzia, that our lives take precedence. So we'll take a look at this in a moment, but the general idea is that 2 people in the desert, they are far, far away from civilization, from any water source. They have enough water to sustain one, but not both of them. What do? Do both people drink from the water and both die, or does one drink and one live and the other die? We're going to see a dispute between 2 rabbis, between Ben Petora and then Rabbi Akiva, who is still living at this time to teach us some great wisdom. Who'd like to read this text from Bava Metzia? Yeah, Marsha.
If 2 people were walking on a desolate path, and there was a jug of water in the possession of one of them, and the situation was such that if both drink from the jug, both will die, as there is not enough water. But if only one of them drinks, he will reach a settled area. There is a dispute as to the holocaust. Then at Torah taught, it is preferable that both of them drink and die. In
Now, how many of you were surprised to see that response from Rabbi Akiva? I own the jug. The water is mine. My buddy did not ration his water well, and we are stuck in the desert. Water is mine, and there's enough to save one of us. Rabbi Akiva says, I drink, I save myself, and I watch my buddy die. How many people were surprised to see that? If you think about it, though, does it make sense? Is it better that two people lose their lives rather than one? Now, granted, I mean, we're trying to think of the guilt that the survivor would have in terms of having consumed the water, saved himself, leave his buddy back there, whatever may have happened. But the text is clear that our life, my life, if the choice between my life and your life, my life takes precedent. My life takes precedent. Okay? It's an ingrained part of our tradition. So we're not dealing with the guilt here. We're just dealing with the facts on the ground. But we also have to look at how our lives take precedent in the case of self-defense. This comes from the Midrashic collection, the Bamidbar Rabbah. Sail the Midianites. Why? They sailed you, it says in Numbers chapter 25, verse 18. From here the sages said, rise and kill the one who comes to kill you. Rise and kill the one who comes to kill you. The principle of self-defense. Perhaps we've heard of the lessons from the Torah that talk about if someone is tunneling into your home at night and they come into your home, the presumption is that that person is there to hurt you, to injure you, to kill you. You are permitted to kill him first, even though, yes, it seems to be a violation of the Noahide law that prevents murder. Our lives take precedent. We're not going to give our lives and sacrifice our lives so that someone else can violate the Noahide laws and kill us instead of us killing them. No, the flip side of that is that the text also says that if someone breaks into your home during the daytime, you're not permitted to kill him because the sense is that he's not there to hurt, harm, or injure you. It's probably to steal or to burglarize or whatnot. So there's even a different sense whether the person is coming into your home and at the day in the day or in the night. So what we see here from these texts so far, life has inherent value, and our lives take precedent. Okay? But we also have responsibility. Actually, let me go back to the text we just read from the Midbar Rabbah. That text shows us that we have the ability, even the responsibility to exercise power, even though it may result in the loss of the lives of others. But we have to consider when flexing or exercising our power is an act of self-defense or not. In self-defense, using that power to kill someone who's going to kill us first is permitted. You can only imagine the modern state of Israel in issues of warfare and whatnot, how this comes to the mind of Israeli soldiers who know this dictum and this responsibility that comes from our tradition. At what point do you use your power to kill another person? Because with that power comes responsibility. So these next texts from Genesis and from Bereshit Rabbah, they introduce the principle of human responsibility because power has been entrusted to us. We see in the first creation story that we are responsible for this earth. We have to take care of it. We have dominion over it. It's our responsibility. Who'd like to read this text from Genesis chapter? Yeah. Thanks, Beth.
And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish in the sea, the birds in the air, the birds in the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep upon it. And God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on earth.
Humankind was created in the first creation story, in the first chapter of Genesis. Humankind was created last, and we have dominion. We are to master the earth. Master the earth, rule over the fish of the sea, the birds, all the living things that creep on earth. We master it, we rule over it, but we also take responsibility for it. This doesn't last long, right? This doesn't last long because it doesn't take very long, 10 generations, for God to recognize that the whole earth that God has created is all messed up. So God wipes it out and starts anew. In another story of creation, not chapter 2 of Genesis, but in another episode of creation, which we see after God had to create the world anew after the flood, we see that not only is humankind needs to be responsible for the earth and responsible for human life, but that life has value. And that's where we get, again, the Noahide laws that we looked at before, to not murder. Okay? When we look at power, we look at a human being, at a human agent, who uses power to repair and to fix the world. And we need to use this power responsibly. But we know that it is imperfect. And this text from Bereshit Rabbah speaks of this imperfect world in which we live and of the things that need to continue to be fixed and repaired, as the text says. And to finish off, I'm just going to kind of summarize this text. A philosopher asked a rabbi, if God loves circumcision so much, why didn't God create Adam circumcised? Right? Why would human beings have to circumcise their 8-day-old boys? And then the question goes on about why do you shave the corners of your head, the corners of your beard? And it talks, and the real lesson here. Anything created in the first days, the rabbi says to the philosopher, anything created in the first days needs further preparation. For example, mustard seeds need sweetening, peas need sweetening, wheat needs grinding, even humans need to be finished off. Even humans need to be finished off. We were created in the image of God, however, there's still work to be done, and we continue to do it. Imperfect as we are, imperfect as we will continue to be, we are still working on getting us finished off. Okay.
So girls are already perfect.
Exactly, yes, exactly. So, we have this sense of power of life being of inherent value, that our lives take precedent, that we can protect our lives in an act of self-defense and use power that way, that we have responsibility to exercise power in this imperfect world in which we live, in this imperfect world that we rule over. So how then use our power? We need to use it justly. And the next two texts speak about using power justly. So before we said that murder is forbidden. It's one of the Noahide laws, obviously one of the 10 Commandments as well. Murder is forbidden, except in the case of self-defense. If someone is going to come and kill you, you are permitted to kill that person first. Okay? You can also, in the case of in the desert, you can also save yourself at the expense of someone else if the water belongs to you. You can't knock him over the head and take his water, and that would be murder. But you can, if it's your own water, you can drink your water and watch your friend die. Al will deal with the guilt afterwards, and you can see your therapist and kind of figure out how you're going to kind of live with that. But you are permitted to do that halakhically. Okay? So, in this text that comes from the Talmud, in Tractate Sanhedrin, how we use power justly. Who'd like to read this? Yes, Marla, thank you.
With regard to all other transgressions in the Torah, if a person is told, transgress this prohibition and you will not be killed, he may transgress that prohibition and not be killed, because the preserving of his own life overrides all of the Torah's prohibitions. This is the halakha
So this is a text that demonstrates when self-preservation is not the ultimate goal. Is not the ultimate goal. So we learn here that Jewish law is always violated for the sake of life. You can violate a commandment in order to save your own life. But three principles alone require us to choose death over life. And again, if someone is holding two of us captive, and the captor says to me, kill your friend, or I'll kill you, then my responsibility is that I have to die. Perhaps his blood is redder than mine. How does this differ from the text from Bava Metzia that we saw about the two men in the desert? What's the difference between letting the captor kill you so that you don't have to kill your friend, or letting your friend die in the desert because of the lack of water? What are the differences?
Isn't there a third option?
What's that?
Kill the guy that's threatening you.
What?
Kill the guy that's threatening you.
How do you do that when you lack power, when you have no power?
If he gives you a weapon to kill somebody else, you should be able to kill him.
Okay. Maybe. Okay.
That's a new Jewish claim.
Yeah, okay.
That's a new Jewish
Right. What if he doesn't give you a weapon? What if he says just beat the bloody pulp out of him? Just beat him up with your fists. And he goes after him. You think he's going to live?
You got to lose.
What?
What do you got to lose?
What do you got to lose? Okay. But he should, okay. So there's I don't think the rabbis were thinking in that. I mean, it's a nice idea. I don't think the rabbis were thinking that way. But going back to the difference between this case of a third person introduced into this dynamic of kill him or I'll kill you, or I've got the water, I'm going to let my buddy die. What's the difference here? Why is one permitted to let your neighbor die and to take care of yourself first, and why is the second one that we just read you need to not take care of yourself first in this particular instance?
In the first case, you're preserving your own life.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You're not purposely killing or murdering the other person.
So you're letting someone else die, but you're not actually active in that. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was going to say the first case is passive.
Mm-hmm.
The second case is more, you have to actually do something.
Indeed. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. In the first case, it's your water. Right? In the first case, it's your water. You're looking out for yourself. Okay? And here, and the idea here is like, if it's not your, what if it's not your water? That's the line that's drawn in the sand. Self-defense is acceptable only when the other is the aggressor. And there has to be a line that you don't cross, where you choose death, where you use your power for self-preservation, or when you use your power for self-preservation to improve the world, we're using our power justly, not corruptly. And this is what...
He was told to kill.
What?
He was asked to kill somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody was asked,
Mm-hmm.
and it was nothing that the original person wanted to kill.
Right. And again, again, what this says is that in other cases, our tradition is clear that in order to save your own life, you can violate the command. One might say, well, if one is permitted to violate the commandment of do not kill in order to save one's own life, but that's not what the tradition teaches. The tradition teaches that you can violate all the commandments except ones that deal with idolatry, incest, and murder. That's where you have to sacrifice your life in place of someone else's life. Okay. Let's go to this next text from Bereshit Rabbah, another Midrashic collection, which is commenting on Jacob's fear and distress. He had just recently fled from. He just recently fled his home. He was out there on his own. He was in this place of fear and distress. And what does this midrash teach us? Okay. Who's next? Margie, going to read it? Oh, did you raise your hand?
Me?
Yes.
Oh.
Sure. Yes.
And Jacob was greatly afraid, and he was distressed. Genesis 32:8. Rabbi Yehuda, son of Rabbi Elias, said, "Are not fear and distress the same? He was afraid if he should be slain, and was distressed if he should slay."
He was afraid if he should be slain, and he was distressed if he should slay. Here he is living with that tension between having the power to kill and perhaps being powerless in that he might be killed. We have the power, but we don't glorify it. It's as if he's saying, I will kill if absolutely necessary, but I am not eager to use this power at all. I will kill if I need to, but I'm not eager to use this at all. Ruth Weiss, this is now we're kind of moving away from Midrashic and Talmudic text to something contemporary in a really interesting book that came out, I think 2008, called Jews in Power by Ruth Weiss, who is a professor at Harvard University, a very popular commentator, a fairly conservative commentator on a lot of issues of this as well. And she says this: "This then is the greatest difference for the Jews since the founding of Israel, that they have something to offer as an acknowledged ally, not merely as individual Jews behind the scenes, as bankers or scientists, cultural creators or impresarios, but collectively because of the political role they have been forced to play. For the first time, the ability of Jews to withstand their assailants affects the security of other nations as much as their own. Jews always believed that they were meant to help repair the world, but now that belief has turned into plain political fact, albeit in the form they least expected and desired. Albeit in the form they least expected and desired." What do we think that form is that they least expected and desired? What do we think that might be? With the nudge, nudge, wink, wink, nuclear capability of Israel, that may or may not exist. Nudge, nudge, right? Okay, so in terms of contemporary nuclear weaponry, Jews, we're going back to to the time of the prophets. We are or legoyim, a light unto the nations. We are to spread our spiritual. We're to spread all like the spiritual lessons and our text and tradition with all the nations of the world in this very kind of spiritual, philosophical, educational, non-powerful way. Here we are, that our repair of the world, our tikkun olam, is happening because of the power that resides in the nation state of Israel, which began in 1948 and was very tenuous until 1967, but post-1967 has been this exponential increase in the power that Israel has over its neighbors in the region and whatnot. There is yes, there is fear in modern-day Israel, but there's also great confidence, I think, as well, for Israel to withstand the external and even some of the existential threats that may come their way. You see, because a messianic ideal, a time when the Messiah would come. We've had failed messiahs, as Rabbi Schuldenfrei had spoken about. Of Bar Kokhba. Again, why did Bar Kokhba? Why was he not the Messiah? Well, because he was right. Okay. Why was Shabbatai Tzvi not the Messiah? Well, because when pressured, he converted to Islam and then and whatnot. So, but what was this messianic ideal? We yearn for a day when we will not need to use power. That's the ideal. However, until that day comes, a Jew will remain strong, and that's the reality that we face today. I think both in this country to an extent and certainly in Israel. What does Isaiah teach us? Isaiah chapter 2, verse 4. I'd like to read. Somebody? Anybody? Bueller? Okay, again. You read the next one, okay? Beth, another one?
It's very interesting because it's Isaiah,
Mm-hmm.
and the next is Jeremiah. So I think this is a good lead-in.
Mm-hmm.
Thus he will judge among the nations and arbitrate for many peoples, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nations shall not lift up sword against nation. They shall never again know war.
And this is, a powerful text that I think we all know. We often sing it. There was an adaptation of this, I think it was by Heschel, who said, after they turn their spears into pruning hooks, they should then turn their pruning hooks into instruments, so that before they can become instruments of war, they have to become pruning hooks again. The idea is to delay that sense of warfare and violence one more step. So this was the ideal. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation. They shall never again know war. And what does Maimonides teach us? The next one? Yes, in the back, please.
The sages and the prophets did not yearn for the days of Messiah, that Israel might exercise dominion over the world, or rule over the heathens, or be exalted by the nations, or that it might eat and drink and rejoice. Their aspiration was that Israel be free to devote itself to the Torah and its wisdom, with no one to oppress or disturb it, and thus be worthy of life in the world to come.
So Jewish sovereignty, in this Maimonidean form, and inspired by Isaiah and other prophets, is that it's able to live a Jewish life freely according to our values without external concerns or threats. Okay? The idea that Haman will not threaten our children anymore. Some of these outside threats will no longer be there. That's a really interesting notion of messianism, because the ideal of Jewish messianism here is simply that we want to be left alone. We just want to be. And isn't that what, when we think about what modern day Israel can be, we can just be left alone to build up our own nation as a free people in Eretz Zion and in Jerusalem. But we don't live that way because of the various threats, both internal and external, that contemporary Israel faces. And another quote from Ruth Weiss. Wielding military strength, Israel changed a Jewish political equilibrium in contradictory ways. The options of self-defense that Israel acquired by establishing its own military and intelligence made Jews for the first time in 2,000 years a potential valuable ally, including of the world's superpower, the United States. And we just saw this kind of come into play most recently when the charge of Israeli intelligence being used to talk about this issue that happened a couple weeks ago, certainly came to be, where Israel was able to provide allegedly valuable intelligence to the United States. At the same time, Israel's susceptibility as a Jewish and democratic state greatly enhanced its utility as a political target for those who demonize both Jews and democracy. Modern Israel, as a Jewish and democratic state, doesn't fit very well into this region, which tends to, which is Arab, Muslim, and hegemonic and dictatorial and whatnot. These advantages and liabilities were inextricably linked, greatly magnifying Israel's prominence in the international arena and exaggerating the image of Jewish power without altering the radical imbalance between Arabs and Muslims on one side and Jews on the other side. So with power, Israel is able to exert power and have influence, not only within its own nation, but within the world as well. We all are very familiar with the technology that comes out of Israel that has been able to not only save lives there, but save lives throughout the world. The great intelligence apparatus that Israel has to make a difference in the region and in the world as well, with many brave Israelis risking their lives, many of them being killed, in order to help protect Israel and help protect the world, especially these values of democracy and maintaining that power in that region. With power here, which one of the things I think that Weiss is saying is that I have a responsibility to protect myself. I am there for you. Israel is a place where when you are in danger, you have a place to go, and you have the right and the ability to protect oneself. And that's what Israel is and remains for Jews today. All of us know that if things in this country were to turn south and turn into a place of persecution and turn and to begin to resemble situations that our people have faced before, unlike before 1948, we now have a place to go. And as long as Israel is there and exercising, using its power in a moral and just way, and continues to exist and thrive, we will have a place to go. God forbid we would ever need to take advantage of that, but we know, thank God, it is there. Tensions and paradoxes. We're going to just kind of we're going to wrap this up. There was a sort of dialogue back and forth between Ruth Weiss and who was the other person that I read, and I forgot his name. But in this particular piece that came out of the foreword, if you just do a Google search, type Ruth Weiss foreword Jews in Power, you're going to see this dialogue. I thought this one was a little bit pertained more. Today, Jews rightfully resent assaults against them, wishing that they could be allowed to live in peace. Kind of going back to that messianic deal that we saw before. New generations of Israelis dislike having to soldier. American Jewish students dislike having to defend Israel on campus. We wish it could be easy. Israelis just wish they could go and work and go to school and hang out on the beach and not have to be called into compulsory military service at the age of 18 and be on reserve duty, until they are in their late 30s and 40s. They wish they could have something different, but that is not the case. American Jewish students wish they could just go and have that great collegiate experience without having to walk by apartheid walls and anti-Israel, anti-Zionist state, and having their Jewish identity being challenged because they might happen to like or even love Israel. They want something different. But paradoxically, Jews cannot achieve peace for themselves, never mind for the rest of the world, unless they convince their enemies that they are unbeatable and home for good. Is that the case? It's still a work in progress. It seems that it's pretty secure right now, but we hope and pray. And the last piece, from Yossi Klein Halevi, who is an extraordinary commentator on life in Israel. He was an American who made Aliyah back in the, I think, early 70s, is that right? In the early 1970s. Lots of articles and op-eds in the Jewish press, both here and in Israel. And this was just a couple of pieces. This is not exact quotes, but some notes that I took from an interview that he and Rabbi Daniel Hartman from the Shalom Hartman Institute had in this video lecture series. He says more or less this: Israel has created a set of dilemmas: the dilemma of occupation, the dilemma of how to fight asymmetrical wars while maintaining basic ethical standards, and how are they using their power in self-defense or not. The dilemma of a separation wall that keeps my children safe and is that daily reminder of the price we pay for having power. Remember the biblical injunction, we were strangers in the land of Egypt. So do not do unto others as you would not want done unto you. Famous maxim from Hillel. Don't be brutal, he says. Don't be brutal. But also remember Amalek. Amalek, the paradigmatic enemy of Israel that all other enemies who have come all harken back to Amalek. Amalek who killed the Israelites, the most vulnerable, and killing them from behind. Remember Amalek. Do not forget Amalek. We live in a world where genocide is possible and where enemies will attack without provocation. Don't be naive. So what Yossi Klein Halevi says, being powerful means balancing both injunctions. Don't be brutal and don't be naive. Quick conclusion. Going back to what I began with, the narrative of Jewish power is a complex narrative, but a necessary one. We know what it was like to lack power, and now we know, especially in Israel, what it is like to have power. There's a famous dialogue between Martin Buber and Gandhi, in which Gandhi, this is prior to the Shoah, Gandhi was urging German Jews to exercise and demonstrate nonviolence. He said to Buber, don't use force. But Buber knew this was a fallacy because of the Jewish experience from thousands of years ago. Now, we know that had Jews had power during the Shoah, we would have used it. And even our connections with power. So often in societies, Jews had an entree to someone who was in power. Even if we had that power, it did little to help us. Those who had Roosevelt's ear weren't able to convince Roosevelt to make decisions that would open up the gates and let Jews come into this country. In the last 69 years in general, since Israel was established, and the last 50 in particular since the Six-Day War, Israel has had to become accustomed to power. Prior to the Six-Day War, power was limited. Since the Six-Day War, it's grown exponentially. And most often, power in Israel is used justly, but sometimes it's used unjustly. And that is when other internal forces have to mitigate the troubling effects of the misuse of power. I think many of us saw and read the reports back in Hebron about a year ago, where a Palestinian who was attacking Jewish soldiers he was trying to kill Jewish soldiers, and he was shot and maimed and was lying on the ground. And while he was lying on the ground and clearly no longer a threat, another soldier shot him dead. Now, was that the use of power? You kill the person who's trying to kill you first, but was this person a threat? No longer. This person stood trial in Israel, and Israel's internal forces were working to mitigate that injustice that was seen there. And I think that the case ended up, was he convicted? The soldier was convicted, right? So, yeah, the soldier was convicted, generating certainly a lot of controversy and internal, saying, kill them all. Others saying we have to use our power. We have to use our power with some sense of morality and justice. Let me finish and then, yeah. So there remains a messianic ideal in which Israel will live in peace and harmony and with itself and its neighbors. That is a messianic ideal. We're still very far from that. But today, Israel still remains in the real world of real life and death issues. Security and protecting its people is first among them. Now, how has this affected the Israel psyche since 1967? Has Israel succeeded in building a state that is both powerful and moral? Anyone who loves Israel and who prays for peace and security know that anytime we see a misuse of power, we cringe. We know as well that when detractors attack Israel for attacks we find when they lack a full understanding or they kind of lack the nuance or an appreciation of the realities of the ground, when detractors attack Israel, we cringe as well. A lot of us kind of are in that, are feeling that tension as well. We hope and pray that those decision makers in Israel who wield power use it well, wisely, and morally, and to help to sustain this nation that is imperfect and that, in the words of the earlier Midrash, is still being fixed as it goes along. And who knows, God willing, maybe this messianic ideal of which Isaiah and Maimonides speak will come to be. But in the meantime, we need to make sure that we are neither brutal nor naive. Thank you. So we're going to take 3 minutes for questions, both the Rabbi Schuldenfrei and me, then we'll go eat and we can chat more in there. So,
not a question. Just reminded of what Golda Meir said right after the Yom Kippur War, that someday she may be able to forgive the Arabs for killing the Israeli children, but she could never forgive them for making the Israeli children kill their children.
Yeah. The comments, questions for myself or Rabbi Schuldenfrei? We're tired. Everyone. Well, thank you for coming out and studying with us tonight. Both Rabbi Schuldenfrei about again going from here to here, and hopefully what I was able to show of getting from here to how we use this in a way that is moral and just, and again this continuing evolving story of our people. So thank you again. Chag Sameach. Just a couple notes. What time is service tomorrow for those? 9:30. Shavuot Festival Services at Congregation Ner Tamid. I just want to point out on Friday, July 14th, I think for the first time ever in the South Bay entirely, Congregation Ner Tamid, Temple Bethel, and Temple Menorah, and our dear friend, the new rabbi there, Rabbi Leah Lewis, will all join at Torrance Beach to share a Shabbat service on the shore, on the beach, and look to your various congregation bulletins and newsletters and emails for specific details. But we hope that you will join us. Yeah, 3 sermons, 3 long sermons that night, right? Exactly. There you go. We'll join in Al Manuel Hall for a little nosh and cheesecake.